Hey, Sens fans, thanks for tuning in to today's episode. We're really excited to welcome back to the show Graeme Nichols. Graeme, thank you for joining us.
What's going on, guys? Thanks for having me.
No problem. And off the top, I want to ask you, it's been a long time since we had you on. I had to scroll. I was like, man, when did we have Graeme last? And it has been a long time coming. So how has your summer been?
Summer's been really good. Can't complain. Trying to get outside as much as possible, enjoy the pool, enjoy the kids. Yeah, just having fun with the family and stuff. And yeah, it's been good. Can't complain at all. What about you guys? Everything's going well?
Trying to survive in the humidity.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah,
I
also trying to get out for walks, except, walking that fine line where it's like when the baby starts to get too hot, it's like, okay, now I need to like rush home and like put him in like an ice bucket or something.
That's truly Bennett's ice bucket challenge.
There you go.
Yeah, that's
oh
right.
my god. And I think Matt's been hitting the course quite a bit this summer.
Yeah. I recently shot a 79, so that was probably best round I'll ever have.
What was the par?
It was a 71.
Okay,
So
you know what? Not
yeah,
bad.
yeah. I had a
But
good
where were
day.
you at the Sens Twitter scramble?
Yeah.
I was playing in Hope for my work.
Brutal.
Yeah,
Brutal.
they treated us quite nicely. Trust me, if it wasn't on the day of Hope, Senstennial would have had a squad there. It would have happened.
I'm honestly
But
afraid to represent the Senstennial. I can't let us get a bad reputation unless we already have one. But as far as I'm aware, I don't know. I think me on a golf course could sink this podcast for sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, starting off on a good foot here. The self burns, they always do well. So because we haven't had you on in quite some time, I want to start with kind of one of the biggest pieces of news that are, I imagine, already in the back of the minds of many Sens fans, and that was the hiring of Travis Green. I think it was the first significant move that Steve Staios had to make in his tenure as general manager. He was very quiet on the trade front for most of the season. Obviously, the only big-ish move being trading Tarasenko out at the deadline. So with Travis Green coming in, I wanted to know what your thoughts were on what kind of impact he'll have on not just the culture of the team, but whether he can actually take that team and get them into the playoff conversation in a more serious manner rather than just having beauty summers.
Yeah, and I guess that's the reputation that he carries with him, right? It's like he's a bit of a crack the whip guy as soon as camp starts. He's renowned for having hard physical camps where guys have to skate hard and they have to arrive in shape. If they're not in shape, they're gonna be screwed. And he's kind of known for pushing that envelope a little bit. But you're right. Like it's a big addition in the sense that he is arriving in Ottawa under a lot of pressure. I think if you look at this offseason, everything's done. Like I was kind of mentioning this on Twitter before I jumped on with you guys, but it's like all the Senators' in-house business is done, right? So between now and camp, I don't envision, barring some like unexpected, unforeseen, huge shakeup or some huge addition. Like I think what you see is what you get. And between now and the start of camp, it's just kind of like you're building relationships with him players and you're trying to get everybody on the same page. And I think like by and large, if you look at Ottawa's roster, like they made some interesting additions this offseason to help balance things out a little bit more than they have in the past. Kind of like avoiding the big names and kind of just getting like stabilizing presences, veteran stabilizing presences who've won before. And I think that'll help in a sense that those guys will help with some of the messaging, massage the message that Green's trying to get in terms of buying and stuff. But I think if this team's going to get to that next level, and everybody's talking about the postseason, and just even vying for a playoff spot, let alone even reaching the postseason, like this team needs to be a lot more competitive than it has been. And I think for him, he's coming into a big situation because I think you have like Claude Giroux in the last year of his deal. He needs an extension, or like who knows what he wants to do with his future. I'm hopeful. Like this is just me. Like this is no insider information or anything, but I'm hopeful that he chose Ottawa because he wanted to be local. And I hope that sentiment still rings true, especially as like new ownership, new players, new everything else. It finally seems like we're kind of all going in the same direction here. But I mean, like the rumors about Brady Tkachuk this possibly being the last year of his career if he in Ottawa if he's not happy or satisfied with the direction and if the stalled development of this franchise continues, like how much longer is he going to tolerate that? I don't know if there's any substance to that whatnot, but I I think most people could look at it and say, you know, reasonably, I think he's been here for what, 7 years already, 6 or 7 years already in his career since he was drafted. So it could happen, right? So there's a lot of there's a ton of pressure on him, not just to get buy-in, but have some success and some positivity to carry this thing forward. So if is he a great, inspiring candidate? I don't think anybody would sit here and tell you that he was like the number one guy on a lot of lists if you ask a lot of Sens fans around the city. But that said, that doesn't mean he can't have success here, and you don't need to be splashy to have success, right? Ultimately, Jacques Martin, when he arrived in Ottawa back in the day, wasn't like a heralded coach by any measure either, and he's the most successful coach in franchise history. So just because he wasn't maybe the number 1 or 2 or 3 guy for a lot of teams, I think that doesn't preclude him from success. So it's going to be interesting to see. And I thought it was interesting with New Jersey because I kind of look at New Jersey similar to Ottawa, where they have a lot of probably more great young talent than Ottawa has at this juncture. And New Jersey chose to look at alternatives on the market. And I thought that was kind of interesting, just the dynamic there with Travis Green. And Ottawa's like, oh, that's the guy. But obviously, like, cynics could point to the money and the price tags attached to like more reputable figures and people who've had more success than Travis Green has. And that's totally fair. But in saying that, he's the guy. So you can't really, you give him a fair shake. We'll see what happens. He's renowned for pushing the envelope, and we'll see how the players respond to that, because I think after this offseason, all the pressure essentially lies with the kids. I think it lies with the young core, and it's going to be up to them to develop that 200-foot gameplay, two-way style, because the run and gun days of the past are gone. You can't play like that and have success in this league. So it's really up to them to buy in, and you know, like, this is it. You've done everything you can. Let's move this forward.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. And you mentioned the dichotomy of splashy versus successful, and I guess that leads us nicely into the Linus Ullmark trade. It was a big splash, and I think that most Senators fans feel happy with the guy that they went out and acquired. Did you see this addition as something that can really kickstart the Senators and maybe plug that largest of holes, or are you a little more skeptical and feel that it might not be enough to move the needle?
No, I absolutely think it absolutely moves the needle. I think if you look at the career of Joonas Korpisalo and you contrast it with Linus Ullmark, like, both guys have played 9 seasons. Like, I had an article or a tweet from I guess like earlier in the month, just contrasting their careers, and it's like they both played 9 seasons. One guy's had 1 season where he had a .915 or higher save percentage. The other guy's had 7.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so like,
Yeah.
you're replacing one of the least valuable goalies in the league with one of the most valuable goalies in the league.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you just hope that alone will have like significant ramifications on just the true talent. I think if you look at Ottawa's roster now, the true talent level is not that bad. It could contend for a playoff spot, and I think Ullmark can be a difference maker. And again, this kind of goes back to like big seasons, right? You not only have to convince Giroux to stay yet, you not only have to convince Tkachuk to like stick around and say, oh yeah, this is a place I want to be for the long term, but Ullmark, like, you went out and you traded a first-round pick. I know it's a late first-round pick, so it doesn't have as much value as, you know, like a top 10 or top 12 guy that they moved in the past. But, you know, you've kind of pushed your chips all in on this goalie, and it's going to be, you got to convince him to stay. He's been part of a really strong winning organization and culture in Boston, and you got to sell him on Ottawa. You not only have to sell him on Ottawa, but you have to sell him on the city. And I think one of the positive things that you can look forward to in this relationship is that he has a reputation. Ullmark has a reputation for wanting to take care of his family, do right by his family. And I think if you look at the city of Ottawa, it's an awesome place to raise a young family. It's safe, it's clean, it's got a lot to offer, and it's kind of got that European vibe to it as well that a lot of Swedes like. So and you know, Daniel Alfredsson's here as well, right? So I'm sure that's going to be part of the big push. So there's a lot of pressure on him to have success, and there's a lot of pressure on the team to extend him.
And I think one of my favorite things about him are his vibes. I think you need to have a high vibes per 60 if you want to be successful in this league. And he definitely brought that in the first video that the Sens released about him. It seemed like he was just a super goofy character. And I think that immediately, like, obviously the stats and the pedigree of a goaltender like Ullmark draws the attention of fans, and obviously they get excited about a guy like that. But then to also add that kind of character and show behind the scenes how he interacts with people, he jokes, he kind of chirps a bit. It makes him even more, I think, admirable to fans. So I think definitely he's the kind of guy who you hope has a good stint here in Ottawa, and hopefully that stint turns into something much longer.
No, absolutely.
And I look at one of the quotes that Ullmark had, and it really stood out to me because he said, we're getting traded, we're going to Ottawa, and it's in Canada. And his son was like, well, what do they have? Like, what's special about it? And he's like, well, they have a museum with dinosaurs. And he was like, I can't wait to go there. And I look at a quote like that, he's talking about his family and how important it is to raise a family. And alongside having a former teammate and a good friend in Anton Forsberg already being on the team, that can go a long way into keeping a guy like him around. I actually think it's more selling him on the direction of the team than the city itself. The city speaks for itself. It's a good place to live, as you said. But it's just going to be, if Ullmark comes in, is the team just suddenly better on paper than it was, barring any other moves after that? But Staios wasn't done there. And, his next move was going and dealing Jacob Chychrun to the Capitals for Nick Jensen and a pick. And obviously going from a big splashy, everybody loved it trade to this trade. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because I think it was David Gregor. I can't even remember him. But someone was kicking around reports that Staios is walking around the draft floor on draft day.
I think it was Dregger, yeah.
Saying like he has a first and second round pick in his back pocket for a deal. And you're like, okay, like that's reasonable. But like, you don't know where that first and second round pick, if it's a really good team, then it's probably going to be, if it was Boston, say, it could be the back half of the first round or like the last 5 picks of the first round. And same with the second round. So it's like, in reality, it could be like almost equivalent to a second and a third round pick, right? So it's, who knows? I think they made the move that they had to. They could have gone for futures. I think ideally in a perfect world, it's like you grab the highest value futures that you can, go sign a guy in free agency, and you're getting 2 birds with 1 stone essentially. But I think what happened is Ottawa just struck out in free agency. They struck out. The guys that they targeted just didn't want to come here, or they were too rich, in terms of years, money, what have you. I think Matt Roy would have been nice. I think Chris Tanev would have been really nice. But realistically, are you going to give them the money in the term that those guys received? And I think the answer is probably no. And all things being equal, maybe Ottawa did put in strong offers for those players, but they chose other organizations, and that's free agency. It's easy to say, hey, go get those guys. It's another thing to actually go out and actually do it. So I think what Staios did is he quickly pivoted. They had a list of guys that they were interested in. Jensen's obviously one of them. And he pivoted strongly. He targeted a guy who I think, yeah, he had a down year, I think, in terms of his underlying defensive metrics and everything else. But I think, like, as I articulated in an article that I put out earlier this month, it's just, I think there's a lot of upside to the play as well. I don't think, if you look at Thomas Chabot, he doesn't really have a partner right now. I think Jensen's the natural de facto partner that he'll play with this season. And you'll keep Zub and Sanderson together as your first pair. But I think Jensen hasn't had a great partner like Thomas Chabot in his career. He's played with some good players, but he hasn't had a guy like that who can move the puck and be efficient like that. So I think there's an opportunity for a bounce back season. They obviously get him for 2 years, and he's one of those veterans stabilizing guys who will hopefully balance the right side. But as I mentioned earlier, if Ottawa endures one injury to the right side, you're going to have Travis Hamonic and Jacob Bernard-Docker playing second and third pairing minutes, and they're still thin on the right side, just in terms of depth that way, quality of depth, and that's probably one of my biggest concerns entering the season.
Yeah, I don't think you'll see much disagreement from us. I think the one thing that Ottawa will have to do is add one more depth guy, either someone who is a right-handed defenseman who can, fill in if there's an injury, or a left-handed guy who has played both sides for most of their career, something to that effect. I think that'll be top of mind for them, and I'm sure they'll continue to look. But, speaking of free agency, Ottawa went out and they didn't go for the splashiest guys. They didn't go for a DeBrincat or a Chychrun. Not that I guess players of that quality may have been available, but they decided to go out and they added guys like David Perron, Michael Amadio, and Noah Gregor, adding some grit and obviously some veteran presence from at least a couple of those guys. So, in your opinion, did you think that Ottawa did enough to improve in free agency, or would you have liked to have seen them maybe go a different direction?
Like I none of us know who the Senators were targeting, like in terms, or even talking to in negotiations. Like, this is what they wound up with, so this is what we have to assess. I think Michael Amadio is intriguing just because he's a two-way guy. He can play the right side. I think if you look at Ottawa's right wing situation behind Batherson, there wasn't a lot there. They've played guys on their offside a little bit before. Obviously, they moved Mathieu Joseph, bringing Amadio, and that's kind of just the way I look at it. They just moved him. They created more room for Ridley Gregg. I think Ridley Gregg, depending on Josh Norris's health, will probably line up when everybody's healthy on the left side. There's nothing wrong with that. And this just creates more balance throughout the roster in terms of handedness. I think Amadio he's a solid third line player, and at $2.6 million, that's less than what Joseph was making. So there's a cash net positive there.
And what did you think about them adding David Perron?
I like the addition. Different element. Foot speed's questionable. But he's still like, I was looking at his NHL Edge data when they announced the signing, and he's like, they don't tell you where he ranks in the bottom 50%. Like they just say it's below the 50th percentile, and that's all they'll say. They don't want to embarrass any players with their proprietary data. But even though he is one of the slower players in the league, and he's old, like he's 36, turning 37, he's still effective. If you look at what he does well, his shot quality is still good. He's still going to the greasy areas and getting like quality goals. He put 17 goals and 47 points, I believe, last year. So like, there is some positives to his game. And I think one of the elements that the Sens sorely lack is a guy who can play along the wall, win battles, dig pucks out, and like sustain offense in the offensive zone. I think one of the faults of this organization in the past number of years is just they're content to rely on rush chances. They're not really generating a ton of offense off the cycle and sustaining rushes and zone time in the offensive end. And that puts a lot of pressure on the opposition, and it keeps the puck out of their own end, where I think Ottawa struggled a little bit. So if Perron can help extend those shifts in the offensive end, and it should help the possession game quite a bit.
And I guess the one other move that Ottawa made, and it was maybe more of a lateral one, was Kelly out and Gregor in. And I don't know if you have any comments on that. I know it's more of a minor addition to the roster.
Yeah, just a big fourth line guy who can skate, and then he's strong on the PK, right? Like that's why teams target him for the postseason. So it's just a wrinkle. It's a different wrinkle, right? But it's gonna be interesting. Like the fourth line, like I can't, even sitting with you guys today, I think they have like 1.9 million in cap space, but like who is going to be the fourth line center? Is it going to be like Steve Halliday? Like who's the guy? Like who's their fourth line center right now?
Ostapchuk, maybe.
There's a lot. Like I'm assuming like Crookshank could get a look on the fourth line maybe to start the year, but like I don't know. It's kind of it's open, and maybe what you might see heading into camp is like they might start inviting guys on PTOs, or you don't really know. And I think like one of the things that we don't really talk about that much online is like every fall, as teams are juggling their rosters, good teams have to waive like quality players, whether they're like fourth line tweener kind of guys who could really help other organizations. I think that's where Ottawa could be aggressive and then target a guy, bring him into the mix.
And in those types of scenarios, teams don't want to lose them for nothing. And, maybe there's a deal to be had where a good player is going on waivers, and suddenly a team's more apt to retain a little bit of salary just to get maybe a pick back. And that is a good way of, stabilizing that fourth line or that bottom pairing, because as it stands right now, like that third pair, as you mentioned, I just don't think it's it. And Clevin, and insert any right shot defenseman here, Hamannik's not it. We know that. And JBD has struggled mightily. And I think pairing him with just another rookie defender, you need a vet there. And that would be a really good opportunity to, see what's out there and maybe add to your team.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the like defensive pairing data. I think Bernard Docker and Clevin played about 50 even strength minutes together in the last 2 years. The results were really good, but you're talking like a really minuscule small sample size. And I don't like going back to the North Dakota days. Like those guys never played together in North Dakota. So it's like there's a lot of newness to that pairing. It's a young pairing. I mean, are you really going to like, would a playoff bound team or a team that has playoff aspirations really trust two rookies? Or essentially, like, I mean, Bernard Docker is not a rookie anymore, but I mean, like, are they going to entrust a rookie and a sophomore defenseman to get the job done? Like, it's like you said, Bernard Docker's underlying numbers were terrible last year. And like some of that, I think, is like, bad team, bad pairings, what have you. Do you throw it all on him? Like, he has a little bit of pedigree as a defensive guy, so maybe it can work, but that's a lot of pressure to put on two kids. And I think it's not really fair. But I think the wrinkle in everything else is like Travis Green has a relationship with like Travis Hamonic, right? So what does that mean? Is this going to be like a Guy Boucher, Payet thing, Tom Payet thing, or is this just? I'm curious to see how this goes. Like there's a lot of like intriguing little storylines to enter the year, and I think there's going to be so much pressure on this team. I'm really intrigued to see what, like, if they can prove their merits and kind of prove people wrong, because there's a lot going on and they kind of all have to pull in the same direction. So it's going to be interesting to see how everything kind of shakes out.
And like you mentioned, there's not necessarily a lot of runway that this team is going to have to put it together. So if we've talked about a few different things about, like putting Greg on the wing, or putting, who's going to be that third line defense, or whether Jensen and Shabak and Kraken as a pairing, it's like there's already a lot of ifs and question marks in those statements, I feel. And I think that the Sens aren't really at a place right now where they can afford to be rolling the dice a lot. And it feels like we're going into another season where that's the case, where we're banking on a lot of different things to go right at the same time in a way that is perhaps not statistically probable. And that is a little concerning to me. But I do want to bring it back to that cap space. And part of the reason why we have that smidge left over to maybe do something with is because of the Mathieu Joseph trade. We sent it to St. Louis along with a pick in exchange for future considerations. There's a lot of the old ugly head of asset management rearing itself on Sens Twitter. And do you think this is an example of kind of like classic poor asset management from the Sens, or do you think that this is something that had to be done to allow the team to move forward?
I just think it's like you're clearing out just roster problems created by Pierre Dorion. Like, yeah. I like Mathieu Joseph as a player, and like he obviously has desirable qualities that you can add to a team, whether it's on the penalty kill, his speed as a third line player and stuff. But they're essentially ridding the roster of contractual problems created by Pierre Dorion. And like, it's funny because we were talking about Amadio making 2.6 and Joseph's making 2.9. So you're talking about like a $300,000 difference between the two players, and that's what we're quibbling over. But you're adding one player and getting excited about that in free agency, and the other, it's like you're attaching a third round pick to it just to get it off the books. But I mean, like, I think there's context to that as well. Like, they needed to clear cap space for Shane Pinto. I think it's really important to get Shane Pinto in camp, get him done early, give him peace of mind. Like, that guy's been through the ringer the last year and a half. And I think it goes for like the rest of the team. Like, I think some of the messaging, even the guys who left Ottawa, whether it was like Korpisalo or Chychrun, I think it's like the messaging from a lot of people is like they just want stability, they want peace of mind, and everything else. And part of me is laughing because it's like, you assholes never endured the Melnick years, and you're complaining about about the shake-up and ownership and stuff. It's like, come on. But yeah, like, stability is important. You want to give these guys peace of mind in the summer, just to like go out, have a good summer, work hard, show up in the fall, and just get this thing going, get it all going in the right direction. I mean, when's the last year that you had everybody in camp healthy, ready to go to start the year? I mean, like, obviously Josh Norris, we have no idea what's going on with Josh Norris's shoulder, but like, everyone else seems like, like this, you were talking about, just a lot of things and ifs, but I think like one of the things that you can't really discount is like the organic growth of this team's young core. And I think like Tim Stützle has another level. I think he regressed a little bit last year, and he's healthy. If he can play at a higher level, if Drake Batherson can keep finding that next level that he has in the past couple of years, if Thomas Chabot bounces back, having a credible defensive partner that he can just like knows is a steady stay-at-home guy who can get the job done, I think that'll help. Jake Sanderson's going to get better. He's going to continue to get better. But yeah, it is. I mean, every season can get derailed by injuries and stuff, but I think there's a lot of compelling reasons to think this thing can improve on its own as well.
And I think as we talked about earlier, but it improved on one of the first days of free agency for Ottawa, going out and getting the best goalie available, really. Because as soon as you get pucks stopped, your team gets better. And Ullmark does that in tenfold. And then you go out and you get a partner that can play with Chabot. Chabot gets better. And suddenly your team is getting better and better. And it's really nice to see that, as you said, like they weren't splashy moves, but they made sense. And right before the free agency had taken place, we had the draft, and that's kind of been lost in all the hoopla. But Ottawa took Carter Yukemchuk 7th overall, and then a slew of large men subsequently. What did you think of Ottawa's draft this year?
I don't profess to be an amateur draft expert, but yeah, Ottawa hasn't taken any Russians. Like it is Pierre Dorian's old staff, right? They haven't really added anyone to their amateur side, so that is kind of like the Trent and Dorian staff, and they're still getting runway to like prove what they can do. And I think this is going to be their showcase year. Like, if you look back at the professional side, Staios had a year to evaluate his staff and say, okay, Rob Murphy, you're out of here. Jim Clark, you're out of here. And I think they're going to add to that scouting staff at some point. And on the amateur side, I think you're going to see that, you might see some moves on the amateur side over the course of the year as well. But I mean, every year picks get panned early and you just have no idea. And one of the things I've learned doing this for so long is just never criticize the draft picks. I mean, you're talking about 18-year-old kids. Nobody wants to see these kids fail. And it doesn't do anyone any favors to like downplay them. Is it disheartening with some of the picks? It's like, I don't know. Doesn't I was kind of like, part of me was hoping for like TJ Ginla, just because I think, if Claude Giroux's not going to play forever. You got the Brady Tkachuk situation kind of overhanging the whole season, depending on what he wants to do. Hopefully he still wants to be here. And maybe there's nothing to that. Like, who knows? Maybe it's just completely overblown by the American media. But I think at least TJ Ginla could protect the top 6, whereas like Yakupchuk is the right defenseman, fills a need obviously, but he might not be ready to play for like 2, 3, 4 years, depending on his development, right? So I don't know. It's exciting. Like, you read some of the reports on Yakupchuk, and it's like highly offensive skill guy, needs to work on his feet and defensive reads. But I mean, like, that's stuff that can happen in time. And just a lot of prospect prognosticators seem to be really high on him as well. So that's encouraging, and that's pretty much all you can take from it. And then everyone else in the 4th round, like, they roll the dice on big, and there's nothing wrong with being big. But I mean, you have to be big and you have to be able to play. In the new NHL, it's not enough to be big. You have to be able to move the puck, play with the puck, and do stuff effectively. And it just remains to be seen whether Ottawa's guys are going to do that. So the system needs a kick. They're one of the most poorly ranked systems in the league from a lot of prognosticators. So they need an injection in talent. I think they did that with their 1st overall pick. But after that, it's a crapshoot, right? So we'll see what happens. But if the results don't pan out, I think you're going to see some shake up there as well.
Now,
Absolutely.
Obviously, Staios left his mark on the NHL roster. Guys were shipped out to make way for guys that Staios obviously felt fit this team better. And I think we've also seen that in the AHL, recently. Egor Sokolov, Roby Jarventie, and now Kevin Mandolese have all been shipped out in various trades. I think what was interesting is him bringing in Bourgault and Chychrun. We've heard that name before. From Edmonton, and he was the assistant general manager there last year, right? So I thought it was kind of interesting. He brought in 2 players from his former organization, and really making his mark on the AHL roster as well. And I know Ryan Bonus is involved in those conversations too, but does it feel like he's really trying to change out pieces in all aspects of this organization? You mentioned, the pro scouts. I think we're going to see changes in the amateur scouting. And now NHL changes, AHL changes. It seems like everything is being altered just to get, I don't know, I guess like fresh air into the organization. What are your thoughts on maybe some of those more smaller deals?
Yeah, I think it's just like you said. I think it's just like people are coming in with different philosophies. And I think if you look at like Roby Jarventie and you see a guy who's renowned for his shot, and you look at your roster projecting forward, and you're like, well, where is he going to play on the left wing in the next 3-4 years? And it's like, if really Greg winds up being a winger, and then you have Brady Tkachuk and you have David Perron for the next 2, it's like, realistically, like, where does Jarventie fit in? Yeah. And I think if you look at that trade, what it kind of reflects is like, okay, we're going to bring in two guys who might fit an NHL depth role better than a Roby Jarventie. You know, they're going to fit like a third or fourth line role. Because I don't think if Jarventie gets promoted to the Senators, I don't think he's ever playing in the top six. And he probably won't be for the foreseeable future. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just being too cynical with his development curve. But to me, it's just he's a shooter, and that's all he is. And if he's not going to get that opportunity to play in the top six in Ottawa, I think it makes sense to move him for the depth pieces that they did. And they acquire a draft pick as well, right? Yeah. So it's not bad.
I think actually they shipped out a draft.
Oh, did they? Never mind. Never mind.
I was like,
but it does, yeah, and it does. Although seem like, for example, Scott Wheeler spoke to how Bourgault seemingly was a bit mishandled in the Oilers farm system, and that actually most of the Oilers prospects are commonly mishandled down there. And it just felt like a shakeup was necessary. And with a new GM coming in, he's starting to put his mark on things. Steve Staios has a pretty good knowledge of the players that he got back. And Wheeler thought Bourgault actually still had a higher ceiling. I personally didn't think that initially, but here we have a prospect analyst who knows his stuff pretty well, saying that we probably got the best player for futures, as opposed to the player right now being Jarventie, who's a little injury riddled.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it also fits a pattern, right? Like Jameson Reese was acquired last year as well. And like, he's another guy who had pedigree, who just hasn't proven himself at the professional level, but he got a contract extension with the Senators, and he's going to be in Belleville this year. And it looks like they're just rolling the dice on guys that were like, at least at one point, higher profile guys than they are. And Ottawa's just giving them a fresh start and an opportunity to prove what they can do.
Yeah.
Now I'll end on one question, not necessarily related to your thoughts on a specific Sens topic, but what are you most looking forward to about this season? It doesn't have to be team performance, although I'm sure many people would answer that. Anything from changes at the arena, entertainment, maybe a big theme night, anything.
I think there's a lot of storylines that are intriguing. Like Ullmark's obviously the big one. I'm looking forward to see like what just the impact of a quality goaltender. Like if you look at Ottawa's past number of years, like they haven't had quality goaltending aside from like I think like people don't recognize that Anders Forsberg's played really well in the time that when he's healthy, right? Then he had the double knee injury, and I'm kind of looking forward to see if he can bounce back. I look at like Connor Brown in the playoffs last year, and like it took him a long time to kind of get his skating back to where it needed to be after his knee injury. I'm kind of wondering if Forsberg could be fitting in that gear. But like if Ottawa gets credible goaltending from Ullmark and Forsberg, like it can cover up so many of the mistakes that happen, especially defensively. And it would go a long way to restoring some confidence. I think when you play in front of a goaltender who lets in a shot on the first or second shot all the time, and it just habitually happens, you're like, oh God. Like, I don't know how many times I'm putting my kids down to bed. So like I'll get down to watch games like after puck drop, and you come down to your TV and you're just like, oh shit, like they're down a goal already. And then you find out it happened on the first shot, and you're just like, God, Joonas, what are you doing? But it's I think the goaltending is a big thing. I think Travis Green's another big thing. I kind of want to see the buy-in. I think again, man, like the buy-in from the young kids, like they're the ones who drive the ship. They're the ones that are going to take the team to the promised land. And like one of the things that kind of frustrates me, like analyzing and watching and being a fan of this team over the past number of years, is like everyone's just excited about the playoffs, right? It's like, we just need to get back in the playoffs. It's like, well, you build a young core, you just want to do more than make the playoffs. Like eventually you want to ascend the Eastern Conference ladder and have this young core lead the group up like to that level. And it's just like at some point it's got like the conversation has to pivot from, all right, let's be like the wild card seed. And then it's like, well, screw that. Let's like go for a division title or something. but it still feels like we're not close to that, at least like mentally, but I don't know, maybe like this is the year to kind of get into that conversation and everything else. But it's tough because like Buffalo's got a lot of young kids, Montreal's starting to restock their system, and it's like you're kind of waiting for Ottawa to take that next step. And I think at some point we have to start asking questions about, okay, how do we take that next step if it's not going to be this year? So that's why I'm kind of curious to see how everything kind of melts. I think this will be a huge year in terms of philosophies and shifting directions if stuff doesn't go well. And there's so many fascinating sub stories to this season. It's going to be really cool to watch play out, at least in terms of like content. I think you're going to have a ton of content stuff to talk about, but if it goes sideways again, everyone's going to be just destroyed, because I think there is a lot of confidence in this management group and this front office to like build things back up and take it to levels that Pierre Dorion couldn't. So if Ottawa gets off to a slow start, it's going to raise questions about Staios' management and everything else. And I just don't want to go through that again. Like we already went through that for the past 15 years. I really don't want to do that again. So
yeah, running this podcast for the last 4 years without playoffs, it takes a toll, I tell you.
Yeah.
Well, that's the crazy part, man. Like I remember when I was like a kid, so like when the team came into like its modern existence, it's like 92 to like, I think they made the playoffs the first year in 96. It was a lot. It felt like, as a kid, it felt like forever, right? Like they're building a young base of prospects and stuff. And I felt like it took forever. And then you look at like Ottawa hasn't made the playoffs since like 2017. And you're like, oh my God, like 7 years just went by like that. And it's just 7 years. Like it's like the worst run in this franchise's history of like just ineptitude.
Yeah.
And that's like coming back from like the early 90s. You'd be like, no, there's no way. Those teams, like those teams are so bad. And it's just totally different, but it's a longer string of mediocrity. It's just crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's been a hard time, man. Like it's it's like I don't really remember. Well, I don't at all remember those first years that the team were here. But you hear anecdotally that the Sens were like laughably terrible, right? And it's like they were laughably terrible, and then like you say, like a few short seasons later, they were making the playoffs, and like 5 years after that, they were like arguably the best team in the league. And it's like that sort of time period has pretty much already elapsed from like when the Senators last made the playoffs. And to your point, like it doesn't really feel like we're much closer to making the playoffs. Like a lot of things could potentially go wrong this year. Where like, one like recurring shoulder injury for Josh Norris, and a shaky start from Ullmark away from like maybe trading our captain like that. It really feels like
It
we're
can
on
go,
a
yeah,
razor's edge here.
Well, it just can go in so many different directions, and hopefully it goes in the right one. But I think there's tons of reason for optimism. I'm intrigued to see how the young guys perform, but at the same time, it's you have some storylines that could play out where you're like, oh God, here we go again. But I think that's what just the stakes are higher this year, right? Like for the first time in a long time, I think the stakes are higher, and like you don't have cronyism with you in the organization. It's not like Melix Honchos are running the board of directors and you have to worry about that. Like Michael Andlauer seems like a credible owner. There's a degree of professionalism and communication that previously wasn't in this organization. And I think they hold themselves to a higher standard. And I think Staios brings that with him as well. And I think if they don't get the results, there's going to be a lot of accountability. And I think one of the good things about this group is that Staios doesn't really have an attachment to any of the players here or anything. Like he hasn't really put his stamp on this team yet, right? Like we talk about the moves that he's made kind of being under the radar and shrewd, and he's filling holes and creating balance, but he hasn't really put his stamp on this team yet. So it's going to be really, really intriguing to see how this unfolds, but I'm looking forward to it. But the weird part is too, it's like when have we had an off season where like there's nothing left to do, and there's still like 2 months left before October. Like,
yeah,
what do we do?
This time last year, we were like, are we going to sign Shane Pinto? And then we were like, oh, no, we're not.
And then a month later, we were like, are we going to sign Shane Pinto?
and then like Brady Tkachuk didn't have a contract and the season's starting. And we're still talking about that. And you're like, like there's been a ton of seasons where it's just like there's just weird stuff dragging in the season for like no reasons. It's like get stuff done. And I think that's it's refreshing to see what Staios is doing. It's just there's a method to everything he does, and I think it's all by design this offseason. Like it started with the small signings ahead of the July 1st free agency signing day, and it's carried over, and it's encouraging. I think there's a lot of encouraging signs, but I think at the same time, like Bennett said, like there's a lot of what ifs, and is that reflective of a bad team? I don't think Ottawa's like a very super strong team yet, but I think they're trending in the right direction, and I think there's a lot of optimism, and I think there is a chance for some of these ifs to turn out positive. So it's just, again, it comes down to goaltending and the buy-in from the guys, and if that both of those things happen, I think this team can do some really awesome things next season.
Well, I want to thank you again for your time this evening, but did you want to plug anything? Any new articles coming out for Roman a day, or what do you have on the docket?
I don't know, man. It's a good question. Don't have to plug anything. You can find my stuff online. G Nichols, Nichols at .substack.com. You can find me on X at Graeme Nichols, GRAEME NICHOLS. And I publish everything there. You can subscribe to my site, so everything gets pushed to your inbox, email inbox, so you never have to worry about missing anything. And that's it, man.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Graeme. Always appreciate your time. So enjoy the rest of your summer, and as always, go Sens, go.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Take care.